In the late 1990s, professional wrestling was on the edge of a massive transformation. What once felt like simple good versus evil storytelling was about to evolve into something far more intense, unpredictable, and real. Audiences were changing, expectations were rising, and the world of wrestling needed something different, something bold enough to capture attention and refuse to let go. At the center of this shift stood a man who had always been behind the scenes, a businessman, a visionary, and the ultimate authority figure, Vince McMahon. For years, he had been the voice of the company, but now he stepped into a new role, not as a commentator, but as the most powerful and controlling boss the audience had ever seen. He demanded respect, he demanded obedience, and he expected every superstar in his company to follow his rules without question. But then came someone who refused to play by those rules. Stone Cold Steve Austin wasn't the typical hero. He didn't try to please the crowd. He didn't act like a role model. Instead, he brought something raw and authentic, an attitude that connected instantly with millions of fans. He was rebellious, fearless, and completely unpredictable. Where others saw authority, Austin saw something to challenge. Where others stayed silent, he spoke louder than anyone else. And that's where everything changed. This wasn't just another storyline. This was a collision between two completely different forces: control versus rebellion, power versus defiance. Vince McMahon represented order, structure, and authority. Stone Cold represented chaos, freedom, and the refusal to be controlled. These two collided. It didn't just create great television, it created a revolution. What followed was more than just a rivalry. It became the driving force behind one of the most iconic periods in wrestling history. Week after week, fans tuned in not just to watch matches, but to witness something unpredictable, something that felt real, something that pushed boundaries and redefined what WWE could be. This is the story of how one rivalry didn't just entertain millions, it changed WWE forever. Rivalry between Stone Cold Steve Austin and Vince McMahon did not begin as just another storyline. It was carefully built into something that felt real, personal, and impossible to ignore. What made it a masterstroke wasn't just the conflict itself, but how perfectly it reflected the mindset of the late 1990s. People were tired of authority. They wanted someone to challenge power. And in WWE, that person was Stone Cold Steve. Vince McMahon's transformation into the evil boss character was a turning point. Before this, he was known mostly as a commentator. But once he stepped into the role of the controlling chairman, everything changed. He became the embodiment of corporate power, someone who believed he was always right, always in control, and always untouchable. This character wasn't just a villain, he was a symbol of authority that fans loved to hate. On the other side was Austin, a completely different kind of superstar. He didn't follow the traditional path of a hero. He didn't ask for approval. He didn't care about rules. Instead, he represented rebellion in its purest form. He spoke the language of frustration that millions of fans felt in their everyday lives. And when he targeted Vince McMahon, it instantly created a connection with the audience that no scripted storyline could replicate. The brilliance of this rivalry was in its simplicity. A boss trying to control an employee who refused to be controlled. But WWE elevated this simple idea into something unforgettable through execution. Week after week, Vince would attempt to punish, manipulate, or remove Austin from the spotlight. He used his power to stack the odds against him, booking unfair matches, forming alliances, and even creating entire factions designed to destroy Austin. But no matter what Vince did, an episode of WWE Raw became must-watch television because viewers never knew what Austin would do next. Would he attack Vince? Would he disrupt a match? Would he embarrass the boss in front of millions? That uncertainty became the driving force behind WWE's success during this period. One of the defining aspects of this rivalry was how it blurred the line between fiction and reality. Vince McMahon wasn't just playing a boss, he actually owned the company. That added a layer of authenticity that made every confrontation feel more intense. When Austin defied Vince, it didn't feel like a scripted moment. It felt like a real act of rebellion. And then came the moments that turned this rivalry into legend. The stunner on Vince McMahon became one of the most iconic moves in wrestling, not because of the move itself, but because of who it was delivered to. Seeing the most powerful man in the company get taken down by a rebellious employee was something fans had never seen before. It was shocking, satisfying, and unforgettable. Then there was the infamous beer truck segment. In one of the most memorable moments of the Attitude Era, Austin drove a beer truck into the arena and drenched Vince McMahon and his allies in front of a live audience. It was chaotic, hilarious, and completely unpredictable. Moments like these didn't just entertain, they created lasting memories that fans still talk about decades later. Vince, however, was never a passive victim. That's what made this rivalry even stronger. He adapted, evolved, and fought back with everything he had. He formed the Corporation, a powerful group designed to maintain control and eliminate Austin. He used his authority to manipulate situations, proving that he was just as determined and ruthless as his opponent. This dynamic, two strong personalities constantly trying to outsmart and outfight each other, kept the rivalry fresh. It wasn't one-sided, it wasn't predictable, it was a constant battle for dominance. Beyond the entertainment, this rivalry had a massive impact on WWE as a whole. During this time, WWE was competing with WCW in what became known as the Monday Night Wars. For a while, WWE was losing that battle, but the Austin versus McMahon storyline changed everything. Ratings began to rise. Crowds became louder. The energy around WWE shifted completely. Fans who had stopped watching came back. New fans were drawn in. The company didn't just recover, it dominated. This rivalry also redefined what a wrestling storyline could be. It proved that characters, storytelling, and emotional connection were just as important, if not more, than the matches themselves. It showed that wrestling could reflect real-world struggles, making it more relatable and engaging. In many ways, Austin vs. McMahon became the foundation of the Attitude Era. It set the tone for everything that followed: edgier content, deeper characters, and more complex storylines. It wasn't just a part of the era, it was the driving force behind it. Even today, years after the Attitude Era ended, this rivalry is still considered one of the greatest in wrestling history, not because of nostalgia alone, but because of how perfectly it was executed. It had the right characters, the right timing, and the right story. Most importantly, it had authenticity. Stone Cold Steve Austin wasn't just playing a rebellious character, he felt real. Vince McMahon wasn't just acting like a boss, he was the boss. And when those two forces collided, it created something that went beyond entertainment. It created history. Rivalry between Stone Cold Steve Austin and Vince McMahon didn't end when the Attitude Era faded. It left behind a blueprint that would shape WWE for years to come. What started as a simple storyline between a rebellious superstar and an authoritarian evolved into something far more influential. It redefined how wrestling stories were told, how characters were built, and how audiences connected with the product. One of the most important impacts of this rivalry was the shift in storytelling. Before this, wrestling largely followed predictable patterns of heroes and villains. But Austin vs. McMahon proved that audiences wanted more depth, characters who felt real, conflicts that mirrored real-life struggles, and stories that blurred the line between fiction and reality. This approach became the foundation for future WWE programming, influencing the way storylines were written long after the Attitude Era ended. It also established the anti-hero as the most powerful character type in WWE. Stone Cold Steve. Austin wasn't a traditional good guy. He was aggressive, defiant, and often crossed the line. Yet fans connected with him more than any clean-cut hero before him. This changed how WWE approached its top stars. In the years that followed, many superstars adopted elements of that anti-authority attitude, proving that audiences were drawn to authenticity over perfection. Another major impact was the importance of the authority figure in WWE storytelling. Vince McMahon's on-screen role became a template that WWE would revisit again and again. Future storylines frequently included powerful figures trying to control rebellious superstars, creating a familiar but effective dynamic. While none could fully replicate the magic of the original, the influence of Vince's character remained visible in WWE for decades. From a business perspective, the rival Monday Night Wars, WWE needed something strong enough to compete, and Austin vs. McMahon delivered exactly that. The surge in ratings, audience engagement, and overall popularity helped WWE not only survive, but ultimately surpass its competition. This success allowed WWE to expand its reach, grow its brand, and secure its position as the leading wrestling company in the world. Perhaps the most lasting legacy of this rivalry is how it changed audience expectations. Fans no longer wanted just matches. They wanted stories, moments, and emotions. They wanted unpredictability. They wanted to feel something real when they watched WWE. This shift forced WWE to continuously evolve, ensuring that storytelling remained at the heart of its product. Even today, the echoes of Austin versus McMahon can still be felt. Whether it's in rebellious characters, authority-driven storylines, or the emphasis on creating unforgettable moments, the influence of that rivalry is still present. It set a standard that future generations would strive to reach, even if they could never fully replicate it. In the end, Stone Cold Steve Austin versus Vince McMahon wasn't just a rivalry, it was a turning point. It transformed WWE from a wrestling company into a global entertainment powerhouse. And more importantly, it proved that when storytelling, character, and timing come together perfectly, the impact can last forever. What came after the rivalry was just as important as the rivalry itself. In the years following the peak of WWE's Attitude Era, the company continued to lean on the storytelling formula that Stone Cold Steve Austin and Vince McMahon helped perfect. Authority figures, rebellious superstars, and emotionally charged conflicts became recurring themes, but none carried the same raw energy that defined their original feud. As WWE moved into the ruthless aggression era, new stars emerged, but they were often compared to Austin. Superstars were no longer just athletes. They were personalities shaped by attitude, edge, and realism. The expectation wasn't just to perform in the ring, but to connect with audiences on a deeper level, something Austin mastered during his rise. At the same time, Vince McMahon's character continued to evolve. He was no longer just the villain of one storyline. He became a central figure in WWE's identity. His presence reminded fans of the power dynamic that once drove the company's biggest success, even as new authority figures were introduced over time. The ripple effect of this rivalry could also be seen in how WWE structured its biggest events. Major pay-per-views began focusing more on personal rivalries rather than just championship matches. The idea that a story could sell a match became a core principle, and it all traced back to the emotional investment fans had in Austin versus McMahon. Another lasting impact was how unpredictability became a necessity rather than a bonus. During the height of their feud, anything could happen at any moment, and fans expected that same level of surprise moving forward. WWE had to constantly innovate to keep up with the standard it had set for itself. Internationally, the success of this storyline helped WWE expand beyond its traditional audience. The larger-than-life conflict between rebellion and authority resonated globally, allowing fans from different cultures to connect with the product in their own way. It wasn't just wrestling, it was a universal story. Even behind the scenes, the influence was undeniable. Creative teams began prioritizing long-term storytelling, understanding that the biggest payoffs came from slow-building, emotionally driven narratives. The Austin McMahon formula proved that patience and consistency could lead to legendary results. Over time, many superstars attempted to recreate that same magic, challenging authority, breaking rules, and positioning themselves as anti-heroes. Some succeeded in their own right, but the original dynamic remained unmatched because of its timing, authenticity, and cultural relevance. Looking back, it's clear that this rivalry didn't just define an era, it defined a philosophy. It showed that wrestling thrives when it reflects the emotions of its audience. When fans see themselves in the struggle, the story becomes bigger than the ring. That lasting connection with the audience is what truly separates this rivalry from everything that came after. It wasn't built on spectacle alone, it was built on emotion, tension, and a deep understanding of what the fans wanted. At that exact moment in time, Stone Cold Steve Austin didn't just entertain the audience, he represented them. and that made every confrontation with Vince McMahon feel personal. Because of that, the impact of their story continues to echo in subtle ways. Even today, whenever a WWE superstar stands up to authority, challenges the system, or refuses to follow the rules, it instantly reminds fans of that original blueprint. The DNA of Austin vs. McMahon is still present. It's just been reinterpreted for a new generation. This is especially evident in how WWE builds its biggest moments. The focus is no longer just on who wins or loses, but on why it matters. Stakes are defined by emotion, not just championships, and that philosophy can be traced directly back to the intensity of this rivalry. At the same time, the legend of Austin vs. McMahon has grown beyond just wrestling fans. It's often referenced as one of the greatest rivalries in all of sports entertainment, studied for how perfectly it combined character work, timing, and audience psychology into one seamless story. There's also a sense that it captured something that can never be fully recreated. The late 1990s were a unique cultural moment, and this rivalry tapped into that energy in a way that felt natural rather than forced. That authenticity is what made it timeless, and what makes it so difficult to replicate. Even so, its influence continues to guide WWE's creative direction. Writers and performers still look back at that era as a benchmark, not to copy it, but to understand what made it work. It serves as a reminder that the strongest stories come from real emotions and clear conflicts. In the end, what Austin and McMahon created wasn't just a storyline, it was a connection that redefined audience engagement. They proved that when fans truly believe in what they're watching, wrestling becomes more than entertainment. It becomes an experience, and that is why the legacy of their rivalry remains untouchable. Because long after the matches ended and the era faded, the feeling it created never really went away. It simply became part of WWE's identity, living on every time a superstar dares to stand up and refuse to be controlled.